In 2015, we got one of the first proper FPS World War I games. Verdun was incredibly popular at the time, but Verdun took people onto the Western Front, fighting in the trenches, French, Germans, in an all-out war. Later, because of its success in 2019, we got Tannenberg, made by the same people, and it had a very similar first-person style, but this time we went to the Eastern Front, in the snow and the forest, Russians carrying their sabers. But now, in 2021, it has just been announced that the guys that made Verdun and Tannenberg are back with Isonzo. If any of you watching this haven't played any of the World War I series of games yet, I definitely recommend you guys going and checking it out. However, there are some caveats to that, as I'll get onto a little bit later. But as I mentioned, back in 2015 we got our first look at Verdun, in the dark, gritty, muddy trenches of the Great War. It was the first time it had been really conveyed in a video game medium. There were a few World War I games before that, but they'd never been first person and on this scale. It was really the Battlefield 1 before Battlefield 1, but with much more realistic approach. Instead of having automatic weapons like we experienced in the EA franchise, Verdun stayed with its bolt action. It stayed with its mustard gas and artillery fire, hiding in the trenches from bolts and bullets coming across from every single side. There was a whole new mechanic in game mode where you'd hold and defend trenches in each phase of the battle. Then your officer would blow the whistle and you had a timer to try and get to the other trench, and if you failed, you'd then pull back. It was a completely new type of game mode. A game like Battlefield 1 that tried to convey World War I, yeah, it was cool. However, it didn't really give that trench warfare feel. But Verdun made its own custom game modes in order to bring that across to the players, and it was incredibly successful. I remember in 2015 how widespread Verdun was. People from everywhere joining the trenches into World War I. As I mentioned, later on we got Tannenberg, and Tannenberg was a bit different. It was set on the Eastern Front, meaning that there was less mud and trenches and mustard gas, but it was more open. It felt like a bigger scale game in general. And whether you were fighting in the snow or the forest, fighting against Russians or French, Tannenberg was much more spacious and on a larger scale than what Verdun ever felt like. However, it was less popular. Don't get me wrong, people still loved it, but it was very similar to its predecessor. They pretty much used the same engine and a lot of the same textures and just moved it across to a different map. And whilst I think there was definitely enough content in order to warrant it as a second standalone game, I think for a lot of people it wasn't too dissimilar, which is why many stuck with Verdun, especially because that battle surrounded the very typical viewpoint of trench warfare in the Great War. However, lately the two games haven't done so well. Even trying to get footage for this game, I couldn't, because there's no one playing it. It's a multiplayer only game, both Verdun and Tannenberg, and currently as I'm recording this there's 87 people on Verdun and even less on Tannenberg. At a 24-hour peak you're not going to get more than 200 players on it, which is fine, but for a game that has 64 player servers, it's a struggle to get into an even semi-full battle. But that's expected. With multiplayer only games you can expect the player base to drop off after a while, and Tannenberg and Verdun I think definitely warranted themselves as a success of a series. They were very well received, and Verdun especially had a massive player base at the time. But of course, as everything comes to an end, it's time for the developers to come back, and this is where Isonzo comes in. Much like Verdun and Tannenberg, they're trying to focus on one specific era and battle within World War I. But with Isonzo we're going to the Alps, the mountain battles, and this is where I think they've been extremely clever with picking their terrain and the battle that they're going with for this game. Much like Tannenberg did to Verdun, it gives a completely different setting, a completely different feel, and upping the scale even more. Isonzo will take place on the Italian front of the Great War, and it will feature alpine warfare, taking place upon the scenic peaks, the rugged valleys and idyllic towns of northern Italy. This is the first time that we've really had some proper town/city warfare. It's always been very out in the open, whether it is in trenches, fields or forests. We're now going into the cities, using buildings for cover, and you'll be able to take place inside the windows of each building, using them to your advantage, and even more using terrain in order to gain supremacy on the battlefield. Not only are we going to a completely new setting, but of course we now have the Italian faction within the game, and of course a brand new game mode, Offensive. It puts players right in the middle of the key historical battles on the Italian front, from the high altitude combat when you're fighting in the Alps with mountain peaks, or even the ferocious battles down in the river. From the screenshots it looks gorgeous. It looks like they've really taken a step up in terms of graphical fidelity, and they need to. It's 2021, and this look of game could be incredibly successful if they pull it off. You can see fighting not just on the cliff sides, but also in towns as well. Fighting over bridges and holding certain choke points in order to gain the advantages over the enemy. There's also flak fire in the background with artillery that will be included, much like it has in other games. And of course, if you've played Battlefield 1, you know about that historical Italian plate armor. Look, it looks like they're doing it a much more realistic way in this game, where it's more used as an engineer class to protect people that have to go into the front, cut the wires, meaning they can take a few more bullets. We also have the inclusion with MGs as well that you're going to be able to fire, and defending the mountain tops is going to be a completely different feel to any of the games you've had before. Imagine this: you're on top of the mountains with your crew, your squad talking and communicating with each other with your bolt action rifles, and all of a sudden you see the enemy charging up the cliff faces. They're trying to take cover behind whatever rocks they can find, but you're hailing down fire on them. IGN released an announcement trailer for this, and my, does it look cool. One of the main things that I really hope that they change with this game is particularly some of the janky movements. Whilst I personally really enjoyed Tannenberg and Verdun, it didn't feel as smooth as a more refined and AAA FPS. Now, of course, don't get me wrong, the World War I series isn't a AAA studio. They're probably more AA at this point. However, I do really want some smoother gameplay, and especially when it comes to gun combat. The bolt action rifles is a fantastic addition, and keeping it to the more realistic side than something like Battlefield 1 is something that is very high in demand at the moment, especially with the historical gaming community. But finding that balance between realistic warfare but also keeping some smooth and quick gameplay, using the advantages of squad warfare, because bigger games that we have in the FPS genre don't do that. They're very much one-man team, run and gun type battles, and when you have games like Hell Let Loose at the moment, post-scriptum, squad, that is really imperative to use teamwork and communication. I feel like if Isonzo wants to do that, they need to add in that sort of thing as well. Whether we'll get in full voice chat communication between generals, captains and squad members, much like a game like Hell Let Loose, we don't know, but I'm really looking forward to see how they approach this sort of team-based to solo type of gameplay. I feel like Verdun and Tannenberg very much work towards teamwork, so I don't think we're going to get that more run and gun solo one-man army. However, Isonzo is looking very promising. I really want to go back into the world of these World War I shooters, and I'm really excited for this one. It looks like it's going to be taking it to an even bigger scale, and of course, the scenery in this looks beautiful. But let me know what you think. Please leave a comment down below. Do you think the World War I series warrants another game in the franchise, or do you think Verdun and Tannenberg were enough? But leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it, leave a dislike if you didn't. But until then, I'll see you in the next one.